And he said, well, at that point in time, it didn't take, it took, you had to have a big room to print things, and you had to have a big machine and a lot of supplies and a lot of people. So he said he would just compromise at least 3 people at every place there was a printing press, and he would get his copies. He said the hardest thing he had to get was the mimeographs. And then, well, make a little bit of a long story short, Dr. Hayden died, and my dad started even working, he'd been working with the guerrillas, and when Dr. Hayden died, my dad took his place and started to work a lot with the guerrillas. And he went into Manila way before the American troops, and with the guerrillas sequestered the puppet government's library and papers. And when he did that, he working with the guerrillas, they helped set, he was helping set up the new government and helped setting up their diplomatic mission, and they had to put a bunch of the collaborators in jail, the Filipinos who had collaborated with the Japanese. And in Philippines, there's a very thin oligarchy, and most of the oligarchy collaborated with the Japanese. Well, MacArthur was raised in the Philippines, and most of those people were his friends. When MacArthur got to Manila, he found his friends in jail, and he found it was my dad that was the one person responsible, and he said, get rid of my dad. Now, the person he brought in, let's see if this works here. Oh, well. Well, the person he brought in to take my dad's place was an Edward G. Lansdale. Now, I don't know if you've heard much of Edward Lansdale before, but there are plenty of people. There's pictures of this man walking in Dallas. He's got a little earphone with a wire going down his back, and there's plenty of people say that was Edward Lansdale in Dallas. Okay, and you see, things like the Kennedy assassination don't just happen because somebody said, oh, some afternoon, oh, let's kill the president. Okay, these operations take a long time to build up. Okay, you have a person who's a script writer, and there's a lot of researchers who say that Mr. Lansdale was the script writer, because he would do things, he would do fake battles. He started doing fake battles in the Philippines, and then he did a big fake battle in Vietnam, because, you know, my father quit the CIA in 1959, moved the whole family out to Oregon. Then he started talking to me in 1969. I didn't believe him, didn't understand him. First words out of his mouth to me were, the Vietnam War is about drugs. There's these secret societies behind it. Okay. And then he says, and communism's all a sham. These same secret societies are behind it all. It's all a big game. Now, I'm thinking my dad's absolutely nuts. Okay, I'm a teenager. He's talking about drugs. Okay, I know more about drugs than my dad does, you know. And then a little light bulb comes in my head, and I think, okay, I mean, it's the late 60s. I'm growing my hair long. Oh, Dad's going to have the drug talk with me. He hadn't had the other talk with me. I already had a 6-month-old baby. So I start to straighten up, and, you know, I'm getting ready for my dad to say, stop smoking pot. He doesn't do that. He tells me about his intelligence career all the way back to the 30s, which had never been discussed in the house at all. And then he starts telling me about how they're playing out a lose scenario in Vietnam. Okay, this is 1969. Okay, and then they start talking about psychological warfare and propaganda and stuff. It soon becomes very apparent I have no idea what they're talking about. I have no frame of reference. It's the late 60s. I've got a record store. I've got a family. I'm putting on rock and roll dances and stuff. So, you know, but he's my daddy, so I'm listening to him, and it doesn't make much sense to me. And then we had some other conversations and some arguments. Learned quite a bit. And one thing he told me, he says they're out to opiate your whole generation. Okay. Now, what does that have to do with the JFK assassination and everything? Well, there's a very good book out there I'm going to recommend. It's called Generations, A History of America's Future, from 1529 to 2060 something. Okay, and these It's out of sociology, and these people went back to the 12th century actually and show that there's these 4 generations that go through history that help each other and move us forward. Okay? So in that book, they talk about a generation that didn't cohere in the 1860s. Okay? And they didn't come together. Some of them joined the generation before, some of them joined the generation after, some of them just went out in the woods and did weird stuff. Okay? Well, in there, the analysis is because it happened because of the assassination and war. And there was another thing that they don't talk about. It was opium. It was why that generation didn't cohere. Okay? Well, what does that mean? Well, when you have 4 cylinders in the engine, it runs pretty good. When you only get 3 cylinders, it makes us as a society much more susceptible to these sinister forces in the shadows, to their manipulations. Okay? And so you had a situation after the Civil War. It's hard to get the Americans to go back to war because there's a lot of death happened. But through yellow journalism and false flag event, the Maine did not blow up because the Spanish put a a bomb on the outside. There was an admiral that did a study later on, and he found that the explosion happened inside the ship and went out. Okay, so it was a false flag event to get the American public all up in things and go to war against Spain. Well, we didn't go to Cuba right away, but we went to the Philippines right away. Because the Philippines, Manila is the oldest port in western port in the Far East, and it's very important to opium smugglers. Because the secret society my father was talking about, Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones was started by Alfonso Taft and William Huntington Russell. William Huntington Russell's family was the #1 opium smuggler in America, the 3rd largest in the world. And so they tried again to get rid of us, to get rid of a generation. And to go back, we had the Spanish-American War, and then every generation, every 20 years we had a war. We had World War I and World War II. Okay? So why are they trying to opiate the boomer generation? Again, they do not want this generation to cohere. They want us to be a pieced out, drugged out generation, okay, as an antithesis to our parents' generation of war, okay? So then they've got a hat rack in the room that they can talk about, scare people, start the war on drugs, start the assault on their Constitution, okay? Because another thing, to do this operation, they had a target date of 1950, okay? By 1950, they wanted to have in place television, which is a technological means of mind control. They wanted to have in the modern education system, which we have been dumbed down terribly. I mean, you look at the 8th grade test from the 1880s, most college people could not pass them. I mean, our founding fathers were the last fully trained, classical educated generation. Johann Wolfgang Fichte, in his 3rd address to the German people in 1805, says, we're going to take your children, we're going to teach them what and how and when to think. Okay? And so they dropped a bunch of subjects out of the classical education. Classical education, your #1 subject was dialectic logics. Okay? And you were taught rhetoric. And you were taught civics. And you were taught these things so that you could stand on your own 2 feet and be a human being and not be manipulated. Okay? The Prussian education system, which was brought over here by Dewey and Mann, they found that if they took the subjects, broke them apart, taught them for about an hour, and put bells in between, sound familiar? Okay. They could then create a false construct around us and dumb us down and move us in the direction that they wanted. Okay. And, I come from a family of teachers and superintendent of schools, and I didn't want to believe that, but if you look at it and do the reading, it's what's happened. We've been terribly dumbed down, okay? And then the other thing they wanted to have in place was a nascent drug culture, okay? So you know, and out there in the 60s, they would, you know, you'd find there'd be pot all the time, and then all of a sudden the pot would be gone. They'd flood the market with heroin and stuff like that. And they didn't just do it in the United States. They did it in Australia. They did it in England and in Europe too. Okay, but one thing that happened was a bunch of us kids, we didn't go to the heroin. There was some things that happened. I mean, it's a real long story, but LSD was a little bit of a wild card, because LSD didn't get invented till 38, and he didn't really figure out what it was until 43, and they'd been planning this for quite a while. Okay, I mean, they used LSD too, but LSD is a bit of a wild card. But basically, what happened was the boomers did cohere. Okay, we cohered as hippies around a joint being smoked around a circle. Okay, and that comes from New Orleans and Jackson Square here. But and what came out of the hippies? The History Channel did a big 2-hour special, and what came out of the hippies was a personal computer and the internet. Okay, so those are the tools that we as a society are using to fight the corruption, because that's all it is. It's just corruption. It's just people lying to us, okay, and taking advantage of us, okay, and to stop it, all we need to do is, there's way more of us than there are them, and we need to stand up. That's all we need to do, and you guys are standing up by being here today, and I really appreciate that, okay. And Judy, Lord have mercy, you know, this lady is standing up. I mean, I've been with her many days and seen her speak many times, seen her connect with the audiences, okay, because she's passionate. She's passionate about her country. She's passionate about what happened to John F. Kennedy. She's passionate about Lee Harvey Oswald, that, you know, he has been wronged. That's why, I mean, when we first did Me and Lee, when the hardcover, she wouldn't, you know, she'd been attacked and had too many accidents and stuff. She wouldn't come to the United States. I said, come on, Judy, your book's going to come out. You're going to meet people. She said, no. She wouldn't come. Finally, when her softcover came out, we says, well, Judy, how about coming to Toronto? She says, okay. So we went to Toronto and had a wonderful reception. We had newspaper, TV, all kinds of stuff. Of course, none of it really translated down to Buffalo or anything like that. And one thing we did there, you know, I asked her, I says, well, you know, book's coming out around September. I says, when's a good time? And she says, well, how about Lee's birthday, October 18th? I says, okay. So we did that in Toronto. We celebrated Lee's birthday. And, you know, it came to me. That's a huge political act. Okay, I mean, that's like Roosevelt getting on the bus. Okay, I mean, Lee Oswald was this vile person who, you know, they always tell us he shot the president, right? You know, and here this lady comes along and she wants to celebrate his birthday. So we've been doing that, and once we started doing that, the reception and the crowds have been continually growing, because I want my country back, okay? I don't like the situation we're in today, okay? And that's how we're going to get it back, is by doing political acts and by standing up. So I'm just, you know, thrilled to, I wish there was a big company that was a publisher, but, you know, they ain't doing it, you know? So I'm just thrilled to publish her books, and I'm not going to take too much more time and get Judy up here because she has lots to say. And God bless. Oh, wait, a question.